On November 10, 2015, the life of 30-year-old Pastor Davy Blackburn was irrevocably changed when he returned home from the gym to his residence on Sunnyfield Court in Indianapolis, Indiana. There, he faced his worst nightmare. His 28-year-old wife, Amanda Blackburn, who was 12 weeks pregnant, lay on the living room floor, partially clothed, injured, and covered in blood. Rushing upstairs, he found their 15-month-old son, Weston, safe in his crib. Davy immediately called 911, as Amanda, though still alive, was in critical condition. Tragically, neither she nor her unborn child would survive this devastating event. The next day, on November 11, 2015, Amanda was taken off life support and passed away. Who could commit such a terrible act against a pregnant woman? Was it a random robbery gone awry, or were there more sinister motives involved? Prepare to explore the complexities of this case, which, despite being officially solved, continues to intrigue many who suspect there is more beneath the surface. Amanda Grace Byers was born on July 31, 1987, in Muskegon, Michigan, to her loving parents, Phil and Robin Byers. She was the youngest, with an older brother, James, and a sister, Amber. Surrounded by love, Amanda readily shared her kindness with others. She began her education in Indianapolis, Indiana, before relocating to Elkhart, Indiana, with her family in 1995. Amanda graduated from Elkhart Christian Academy in 2006 and continued her studies at Pensacola Christian College in Pensacola, Florida, earning an associate's degree in 2008. Described as both beautiful and graceful, Amanda exuded confidence and grace in all that she did. Her spirit of never giving up was a testament to her character, and throughout her life, she steadfastly held on to her faith in God. Her family's strong Christian values, particularly her father's role as a pastor at the First Baptist Church in Elkhart, deeply influenced her. With a radiant smile that was her trademark, Amanda had a passion for uniting people in their faith in Jesus. Discover the chilling world of secret crime mysteries, where we delve into the most perplexing cold cases and unsolved crimes. Join us as we unravel hidden clues and explore haunting mysteries. Subscribe now and be part of the journey to bring these cases to light. It was only fitting that she would choose a life partner who shared her strong Christian values, and so she found Davy Blackburn. Davy, born on November 2, 1985 in Tuscaloosa, embarked on his educational journey at Tuscaloosa County High School before transferring to Shades Valley High School. During his father's tenure as a pastor at Brookview Wesleyan Church in Birmingham, Alabama, he pursued higher education at Southern Wesleyan University in South Carolina, where he graduated with the degree in religion and media communication. Amanda and Davy met on a blind date set up by Amanda's sister, Amber, who was dating Davy's best friend, Gavin. It was October 1, 2005, and they all attended a concert featuring the Christian band Hawk Nelson. Although they didn't expect the date to go well, it turned out to be the beginning of something special. Their relationship moved quickly, but it faced the challenge of being long distance. They were both attending different colleges, and they could only see each other during breaks, typically for periods of about 2 weeks at a time. To make it work, they even sought counseling to improve their communication. Despite the distance, they knew they had found the one in each other and made the most of the time they could spend together. Davy saw Amanda as the missing piece that completed his life in a unique and irreplaceable way. Aside from Davy, Amanda shared an incredibly close bond with her sister, Amber, to the extent that they confided in each other about everything. They experienced significant life moments side by side, whether it was running marathons together or walking down the aisle together with their father. On August 1, 2008, Amanda and Davy Blackburn tied the knot shortly after Amanda's graduation. Following their nuptials, the couple initially established their home in Greenville, South Carolina, where Davy undertook the role of an assistant pastor at New Spring Church. However, the tug of their previous home grew stronger, prompting their return to Indianapolis by 2012. Together, this young couple embarked on a journey of creating Resonant Church, an institution designed to offer worship and guidance to young individuals, with its message finely tuned to resonate with the hearts of the youth. Amanda and Davy were both deeply committed to their church, with Davy serving as the pastor. Collectively, they invested a significant portion of their time in counseling and guiding the church community. They engaged in extensive discussions on topics such as relationship advice, marital challenges, and intimate relationships, drawing from their own experiences and faith to offer support and guidance to those in need. Alongside the church, their own family began to flourish as on July 28, 2014, the couple welcomed their son, Weston, into the world. As expected, Amanda proved to be an exceptional mother, dedicating all her time and love to her precious child. Therefore, the decision to expand their family further was an easy one. Amanda became pregnant for the second time in 2015. Although they never underwent an official test to determine the gender, both Davy and Amanda were convinced that their second child would be a girl. They even selected the name Everett for the baby, who was expected to arrive on May 18, 2016. Tragically, Amanda would never live to see that day. On the fateful morning of November 10, 2015, just shortly after 8:30 a.m., the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department received a distressing 911 call from Davy Blackburn. He had found his wife, Amanda, who was 12 weeks pregnant, collapsed inside their residence. In response to the urgent call, Indianapolis police officers swiftly arrived at the Blackburn residence situated at the 28100 block of Sunnyfield Court on the northwest side of Indianapolis. They initiated an inquiry seeking to understand the sequence of events leading up to this tragic discovery. According to his account, the day began like any other. He awoke at approximately 4:30 a.m., dedicated time to reading his Bible, and subsequently departed for LA Fitness Gym around 6 a.m. He explained that he had left the door unlocked due to the fact, at the time, they possessed only one house key, which was attached to his wife's key ring. Davy explained that he had spent approximately an hour at the gym and then concluded his workout session, starting his drive back home. During his drive, he was engrossed in a phone conversation with a friend, which continued even after he arrived home around 7:30 a.m. To avoid disturbing Amanda and their 15-month-old son, Weston, Davy opted to stay in his car in the driveway to finish up his conversation. His phone conversation came to an end around 8:20 a.m., and he made his way into the house and stumbled upon a scene straight out of a horror movie. On the living room floor, Amanda was lying face down, unconscious and covered in blood. Davy said he was initially uncertain about what had transpired, believing that Amanda might have fainted due to a dizzy spell and that a decorative ladder in the living room had accidentally fallen on her. However, as he looked closer, he noticed that her pants were removed. Her underwear was neatly folded under her left thigh, and her shirt pulled over her head, as if somebody was trying to take it off. Although she was lying in a pool of blood, she was still breathing. Deeply concerned about the safety of their 15-month-old son, Davy ran upstairs to reach Weston's room where he found the child safe and unharmed in his crib. Overwhelmed by a flood of emotions, he promptly dialed 911 to request urgent assistance. While they entered the house, officers discovered Amanda in the exact condition Davy had described. She was clinging to life, and paramedics engaged in a relentless battle to resuscitate her. When that failed, they rushed her to the hospital in hopes of saving both her and her onboard child, racing against time. With this critical situation unfolding, the investigation swung into motion. Even though suspicion had never been directed at Davy, it was standard procedure to commence the investigation with a close examination of the spouse. So the investigators visited the LA Fitness Gym where Davy had been that morning. Following a thorough confirmation of his alibi, Davy was quickly cleared from any involvement in the murder. With this crucial step completed, the investigative efforts could be concentrated on the crime scene itself. The officers instantly observed a series of irregularities within the scene. Amanda's wallet and credit cards were strewn across the floor, a pack of Swisher Sweet cigars were conspicuously placed on the kitchen counter, and a decorative lamp had been knocked over in close proximity to where Amanda lay, all of which pointed to a violent struggle. The presence of the cigars was particularly perplexing as neither Amanda nor Davy were smokers. This scene bore the haunting marks of the violence and confrontation that had transpired just hours earlier. While investigators were diligently searching for clues, Amanda was fighting for her life. Tragically, she wouldn't survive, On November 11, 2015, she was taken off life support and passed away, along with her unborn baby, leaving her family in mourning over her tragic murder and desperate for justice. The autopsy report unveiled the cruel and horrific extent of the violence inflicted upon Amanda. Contrary to Davy's initial impression that she might have been struck in the head, the report indicated that she had sustained 3 gunshot wounds, one to her arm, another to her upper back, and the fatal one to the back of her head. In addition to the gunshot wounds, there were telling signs of trauma, including scratches on her left cheek, a split lip, and the loss of a lower tooth, painting a distressing picture of the physical ordeal she had endured. Throughout the crime scene, extensive DNA swabs were conducted spanning the entirety of the house. This methodical investigation led to the discovery of a variety of items and pieces of evidence, such as a roll of duct tape, earphones, a bullet, and scattered change on the floor. Collectively, these findings painted a vivid picture of the chaos of the crime scene. Additionally, the caliber of the bullets was identified as either a 38 or 9mm, providing a crucial clue regarding the potential weapon utilized in this tragic incident. Another vital clue emerged within the confines of the home. Amanda's cell phone was located in her bedroom, and upon examination, investigators noticed that she had received an email alert at 7:53 a.m. on the morning of the home invasion, notifying her about a suspicious transaction involving her Chase debit card. Subsequent investigation revealed that the debit card had been stolen. This digital breadcrumb initiated a chain of investigative steps that would eventually lead the detectives to a series of ATM transactions. These transactions in turn led to the discovery of surveillance footage capturing a suspect in the act of attempting to withdraw money. The individual in the footage had wrapped a pink shirt around his face in an effort to conceal his identity, marking a significant breakthrough in the investigation. He was also wearing a dark-colored vest. This evidence unmistakably indicated that the home invasion had, in fact, been a robbery that tragically escalated into a deadly confrontation. Around the same time, a series of burglaries in the same vicinity began to reveal a pattern too conspicuous to overlook. On that very morning of November 10th at 5:23 a.m., Jacola Steersbrook, a resident of the same neighborhood, placed a call to 911 to report a break-in. She recounted to the police that she had woken at 4:30 a.m. only to discover her cell phone missing from her bedroom. As she ventured further, she discovered that her sliding glass door was ajar. Her potted plants had been disturbed, and her Apple MacBook, purse, headphones, car keys, and even a pack of Swisher cigars were all gone. In an even more disturbing turn of events, her 2007 Chrysler Sebring was absent from the parking lot. The investigation also unveiled that the apartment surveillance cameras capturing still images of the 3 individuals entering the premises. Although their identities remained undisclosed, it was determined that the burglars had gained access by cutting the porch screen and subsequently opening the sliding door. However, they had disabled the camera during the actual burglary, further obscuring their identification. The second 911 call that morning was placed at 8:17 a.m. by Allison Becker, a neighbor who resided on the same street as Davy and Amanda. She reported that she had not been at home that morning and returned to discover that her residence had fallen victim to a burglary. The thieves made off with 4 televisions, a MacBook Pro, a Tiffany pearl necklace, a pink woman sweater, an AT&T remote, a bag of oranges, and a few bed sheets likely used to wrap the stolen items for transport. As the investigation unfolded, it became apparent that this apartment was also equipped with a security camera, which, much like the others, had been disabled. This time at 5:36 a.m., detectives pieced together that the burglars had entered the apartment by cutting through the porch screen and somehow managed to unlock the deadbolt, securing the sliding glass door. To add to the unnerving atmosphere, it appeared that the robbers had settled in, consuming wine and beer before departing, leaving the empty bottles behind. These unsettling actions hinted at a disturbing level of confidence the burglars had. Detectives at this point believed that the same group might have been responsible for the string of burglaries in the area and could have been responsible for the death of Amanda and her unborn baby. As the police conducted inquiries throughout the neighborhood to seek information on any suspicious activities from the day of the robberies, they indeed found several individuals who had witnessed unusual occurrences. One neighbor recounted that just before 7 a.m. on the ill-fated morning, she had seen a man dressed entirely in black with a hood concealing his head, walking in front of her house. Another witness recalled seeing the same man who was engaged in a loud conversation on his phone with a t-shirt pulled over his face. By 7:10 a.m., yet another neighbor reported observing a Chrysler Sebring pull up alongside the man. The man was seen entering the car, which then quickly departed. This information expanded the investigative net, eventually revealing another crucial clue. Surveillance footage from one resident's camera captured both the car and the man. Another witness came forward to report that on the morning of November 10, 2015, she heard two loud noises accompanied by a woman's screams, a chilling detail that led the police to theorize that this might have been the moment when Amanda was attacked. The stolen Chrysler Sebring emerged as a pivotal link, unmistakably connecting the dots between the series of burglaries. Remarkably, it was discovered abandoned by the side of the road, not far from the Blackburn residence on November 11, 2015, the very day Amanda tragically passed away. A comprehensive search of the vehicle led to the discovery of some of the stolen items alongside an ATM receipt, indicating a denied transaction attempt of $500 conducted using Amanda's debit card at 6:36 a.m. on November 10th. This evidence was supported by the ATM surveillance footage capturing a man with his face concealed in a pink sweater, as it was previously mentioned. However, this time another significant piece of evidence emerged. The same man was seen in surveillance footage of a nearby ATM at 6:54 a.m., successfully completing a transaction for $400. This evidence strongly suggested that Amanda had been attacked almost immediately after Davy left the house that morning. Nonetheless, DNA samples were collected from the car and subsequently forwarded for testing, with the results screened through Cody's to identify any potential matches. By November 17, 2015, investigators received a breakthrough, a DNA match that finally put a suspect on their radar. The DNA discovered in the car was linked to a 21-year-old man named Jalen Watson. Intriguingly, Jalen had only been released from prison on August 6, 2015 following a previous conviction for burglary, and he was currently on parole. Delving into Jalen's Facebook account, detectives unearthed the connection between him and a 24-year-old man named Dino Gordon, who also happened to be on parole for burglary. The plot continued to thicken as the investigators tracked the location data associated with the phone numbers of both these men on the morning of November 10th. The unfolding sequence of events began to reveal itself through the location pings from their phones at 4:40 a.m., roughly coinciding with the timing of the first robbery. Their phones pinged off the tower nearest to the initial home. This pattern recurred with the second robbery and chillingly corresponded to the estimated time of Amanda's murder at 6:25 a.m. The digital footprints left behind continued to be traced, leading investigators to the towers closest to the ATMs, where Amanda's stolen debit card was used at 6:39 a.m. and then once more at 6:54 a.m. Gradually, the pieces of the puzzle were coming together, painting a clear picture of the crime spree. Deeper scrutiny of Jalen's communications ultimately led to the discovery of the third and youngest member of the burglar trio, an 18-year-old named Larry Taylor Jr. A review of the communication records unveiled conversations that implicated Larry in the crime that morning. Born in 1997, relatively little was known about Larry, who would soon take on a central role in Amanda Blackburn's murder. Similar to his associates, Larry also had a criminal history that included misdemeanor charges, one of which involved an incident of public nudity and indecency, where he had exposed himself to a woman in a parking lot. Investigators proceeded to obtain the phone number Jalen had provided for his parole board, which turned out to belong to his older sister, Jornita. When the police spoke with her, she disclosed that on that night prior to the tragic events, Larry, Jalen, and Dino had been hanging out at her apartment. They departed the apartment at 3:30 a.m. on November 10th. Additionally, she shared with the authorities that one of the three men had been wearing a dark vest that morning, corroborating a description provided by a witness. Jornita also handed over a 9mm pistol that had been brought to the apartment, likely by either Jalen or Dino, and left under her bed. On that fateful morning, the trio's criminal activities began with burglaries, which evolved into something far more sinister in no time. According to a confidential informant whose identity remained undisclosed, Larry, Jalen, and Dino had ventured out in the early morning hours with the intention of breaking into a residence to obtain some money. Larry had also brought along a .38 revolver with him. They arrived at Jacola Searsbrook apartment on the east side of Indianapolis on foot. Larry was the first to gain entry into Jacola's apartment and then let the other two inside through the front door. Following the theft of numerous items, the trio fled the scene, using Jacola's car for transportation. They initially drove to the residence of Jalen's child's mother, located near 38 and Kessler Boulevard, with the intention of him being dropped off there. However, as he was unable to establish contact with the woman, they departed and headed to a nearby neighborhood to engage in further burglaries. While in the neighborhood, the men noticed a house with a back porch that appeared vulnerable to intrusion. This particular residence was situated on Sunnyfield Court and belonged to Allison Becker, who was not present at home during that time. The men parked the car and gained entry to the home through the patio door. After spending some time inside consuming alcohol and stealing numerous items, they eventually exited the apartment to load the pilfered possessions into their car. It was at this point that Larry informed the others that he had observed someone departing from a neighboring home, leading them to believe that this residence might be unoccupied. Once they had completed loading their vehicle, the three of them drove to that particular home. It was the marital home of Amanda and Davy. Upon entering the residence through the unlocked front door, the men immediately spotted a purse on the kitchen counter, taking the money it contained and dividing it among themselves. Additionally, they confiscated some credit cards found there. As they continued to search the rest of the home, they unexpectedly encountered Amanda. The men formulated a plan to use Amanda's credit cards at an ATM to obtain money. Their initial attempt to persuade Amanda to accompany them was met with her refusal, and when they tried to physically compel her to leave, she resisted and dropped to the ground. So it was decided that Jalen and Dino would go to the ATM, while Larry would remain behind with Amanda and her son, who was still asleep in his room upstairs. The informant further disclosed that Jalen and Dino proceeded to drive to a nearby Chase ATM, but they encountered difficulties in using the card with that particular machine. Jalen and Dino then called Larry, who apparently provided them with the correct ATM passcode. From there, they drove to a different Chase Bank ATM located in the vicinity of 86th Street and Ditch Road. After parking there, Jalen exited the vehicle and approached the ATM. Given the cold weather, he wrapped the pink sweater that had been acquired from Allison's residence around his face. On this occasion, he successfully withdrew $400 from the ATM, which was then divided between Jalen and Dino. Meanwhile, Larry placed several calls to Dino, expressing his frustration and demanding that they return to the Blackburn's residence to pick him up. Eventually, they complied with his request. But by the time they got there, Larry had already left the Blackburn's house and was walking down the street with a backpack he had taken from the home. Larry was reportedly in a state of panic and urged the others to simply leave him behind. He instructed Jalen to drive to an apartment complex situated at 56 in Georgetown, where they left him at the residence of an individual referred to as Shy. While en route, Larry disclosed to them that he had attempted to sleep with Amanda, but she had rejected his advances. As a result, he had shot her once, and as she fell down, he shot her again in the back of her head. Eventually, the men abandoned Jacola's car near 38th Street and Brookwood Drive in Indianapolis and went their separate ways. The diligent efforts of the Indianapolis police combined with the mounting evidence culminated in the arrest of all three individuals responsible for Amanda's tragic death just 2 weeks after the incident. Larry faced a total of 13 charges including murder, burglary, criminal confinement while armed with a deadly weapon, and robbery resulting in serious bodily injury. His accomplice Jalen was charged with 10 offenses which included murder, burglary, robbing resulting in serious bodily injury, and auto theft. Initially, the third accomplice, Dino, was charged with burglary and theft, but as the case developed, he too faced the charges of murder. The dark saga of Larry Taylor extended even further with revelations about his potential involvement in other heinous crimes coming to light. On November 4, 2015, just a week before Amanda's murder, the lifeless body of Rolando Gonzalez Hernandez, a 27-year-old Mexican man, was discovered next to his car at his apartment complex, having been fatally shot in the head. Witnesses shared with authorities that Larry had openly boasted about a robbery and shooting that had occurred at the same apartment complex, using derogatory language to describe the victim based on his ethnicity. According to Larry, the robbery had produced a measly sum of $10 from Rolando's wallet. Additionally, it was alleged that Larry had confided in other witnesses about breaking into a woman's home and subjecting her to a terrifying assault at gunpoint. Despite these allegations, Larry wasn't charged with these crimes due to insufficient evidence. However, there was no escaping the consequences of his actions in the case of Amanda. Yet the legal procedure to bring Larry and his accomplices to justice was not only complex, but long drawn out. Spanning 2 to 3 years of legal maneuvering, plea negotiations, and the anticipation of a trial, ultimately, Dino and Jalen reached agreements that required them to testify against Larry during his bench trial. In exchange for their cooperation, the murder charges against them were dismissed. Jalen was sentenced to 29 years in prison, while Dino received a 30-year sentence. The trial of Larry Taylor Jr. didn't start until December 2021. However, when it finally did, an unusual situation arose. His defense attorney successfully persuaded the court to withhold information about Amanda's unborn child from the jury, even though Larry had originally been charged with the baby's death as well. Nevertheless, the jurors somehow discovered Amanda's pregnancy during the trial, prompting the judge to declare a mistrial due to concerns that it might evoke sympathy from the jury. A second trial was scheduled for June 2022. However, another obstacle arose. Some jurors had become aware of the previous mistrial and were discussing it among themselves. As a result, the judge declared another mistrial, further prolonging the legal proceedings. The third attempt to try Larry for Amanda's murder was scheduled for October 2022. In this trial, the prosecution relied on the testimonies of Dino and Jalen, cell phone data, and other witness accounts. Thankfully, the trial proceeded without any more unexpected revelations. And by September 2022, a verdict was reached. Ultimately, Larry Taylor was convicted on various charges, which encompassed murder, burglary, theft, criminal confinement, auto theft, and unlawful possession of a handgun. The court sentenced Larry to 86 years of imprisonment, ultimately concluding a chaotic legal odyssey linked to the tragic loss of Amanda Grace Blackburn and her unborn baby. The verdict undoubtedly brought solace to Amanda's grieving family. Davey even went as far as to express his forgiveness toward his wife's killers. However, the irreplaceable loss of Amanda remains a permanent void. Sadly, Amanda's son, Weston, has had to grow up without the presence of his mother, having only been allowed to spend 15 months with her. Weston celebrated his 9th birthday this year and has been thriving under the care of his father, who has found a new path in life. In December 2017, 2 years after Amanda's tragic death, Davey entered into a new chapter by marrying Christy Monroy, a single mother who attended Resident Church and shared the same CrossFit gym with Davey. On November 4th, 2019, Christy, who had a daughter named Natalia from her previous marriage, gave birth to Davey's son, Cohen David Parker Blackburn. Currently, the blended family is flourishing, as evident from their active social media presence and blog post. Usually, this would be the conclusion of our story. However, in this case, there are lingering unanswered questions and missing pieces of the puzzle that have left some people wondering if there's more to the story. Today, we will explore the alternate theories that have piqued people's curiosity, allowing you to form your own opinion. So without further delay, let's delve into the uncharted territory we've previously left unexplored. Before we proceed, we want to mention that most of this information is allegations or rumors, and Davey had never been under suspicion in the official investigation. We want to make it clear that we do not intend to spread misinformation or support any kind of propaganda. We apologize if anything we have said in this video has hurt somebody's feelings, as it is not our intention to do so. Some people believe that Davey might have been involved in his wife's murder, and he was the one who orchestrated it. Several factors have raised questions about his innocence. For starters, it was revealed that during the investigation that just 2 months before Amanda's death, Davey had taken out a significant life insurance policy on her. Strangely, this policy came into effect after a mere 8 weeks. coincidentally right after Amanda's death. Davy benefited greatly from this, but was it intentional? No one knows. Coming back to the day of the home invasion, there were some unusual deviations in Davy's routine. Those familiar with Davy would attest that he typically left for the gym at 5:30 a.m., but on this particular day, he was a half an hour late. His wake-up time was no different than usual, leaving some to wonder about the reason for this anomaly. Furthermore, his workouts typically spanned an hour, but on this occasion, it lasted only 45 minutes, excluding the driving time. Additionally, some find it implausible that Davy would sit in his car for an entire hour without entering his home. In light of these anomalies, certain theories have emerged, speculating that he might have been waiting for his wife's tragic fate to unfold. The 911 call in this case is a matter that has drawn significant attention among web sleuths, and for good reason. There are several troubling aspects to it. First and foremost, the time it took Davy to call 911 is unusual. He waited for almost 12 minutes before seeking help despite discovering his spouse in a severely injured state and covered in blood. This extended delay raises questions. Moreover, the most unsettling part of the 911 call is Davy's strangely composed demeanor. While on the call as the dispatcher connected to another line, Davy remained eerily silent. He made no effort to wake Amanda or communicate with her, even though he knew she was still breathing. This behavior is highly unusual given the severity of the situation. It's equally perplexing that Davy initially thought Amanda had been in an accident when in reality she had been viciously attacked and left for dead. These factors contribute to the mystery and speculation surrounding the case. There's another aspect of this case that has raised questions among some observers. They have pointed out how Davy appeared to be capitalizing on this tragedy. During Amanda's funeral, he continuously tweeted the hashtag #NothingIsWasted. Shortly after the funeral, he legally registered the domain name #NothingIsWasted and even used that quote to brand her tombstone. He went on to release a podcast, a book, a blog, all under the same brand name, detailing his personal journey through Amanda's death and the healing process. Critics have pointed out that some of his statements and blog posts seem to revolve around himself, which has raised questions about potential narcissism. For instance, just hours after the arrest in the case, he released a statement in which he expressed rapid forgiveness for the individuals responsible for the death of his spouse. For some, the speed at which he chose to forgive those who had essentially torn his world apart was unsettling. His quote, "The best is yet to come," has led to speculation and discussions about Davy's motivations and behavior. Comparisons drawn from Davy's post have highlighted how he sometimes appears distant in his narratives. Some people have observed that he presents the murder in a very matter-of-fact way and rarely mentions his unborn child, who tragically never had a chance to come into the world. On multiple occasions, Davy has expressed that while the incident has been painful for him, he wouldn't change any of it, and he believes that Amanda is where she needs to be, by Jesus' side. It's possible that Davy, as a man of faith, has accepted everything life has thrown his way, no matter how tragic. He might genuinely be grateful for the life he has been given, despite the immense losses he has suffered. However, whether coincidental or intentional, some of his behavior and statements have raised red flags for certain individuals. In a bizarre coincidence, just 2 weeks before Amanda's tragic death, Davy delivered a sermon in which he acted out a murder scene, repeatedly shooting someone in the back with an airsoft gun. This performance was intended to illustrate how worship could be metaphorically used as a weapon. If this video wasn't eerie enough, another incident left many people shocked. In 2018, Daviana's current wife, Christy, dressed as robbers for a Halloween party and even posted pictures on social media. What added to the unease was the presence of a ladder in the picture, bearing eerie similarities to the circumstances of Amanda's murder. This costume choice, coming just a few years after such a tragic event, raised numerous questions and concerns. Concerns have also been raised by some individuals regarding how swiftly authorities cleared Davy of suspicion. As a renowned local pastor with connections to influential figures and law enforcement, some believe that Davy was never thoroughly investigated. Additionally, theories began to circulate based on Davy and Amanda's own Q and A videos, in which they discussed their marital difficulties and how they overcame them to become soulmates. Some people speculated that their marital problems led Davy to seek a way to eliminate his wife. However, it's important to note that while these theories sound like elements of a dark plot, they remain purely circumstantial and have never been substantiated. In fact, it's essential to acknowledge certain gaps in these theories, with the major one being, if Davy was involved in the murder, why did none of the individuals involved, Jalen, Dino, or Larry, ever mention his name? Ultimately, we leave it to our audience to decide whether the truth lies in what's already known, or if there's something concealed beneath the surface as we conclude our story here. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you believe Davy had any involvement in his wife's murder? Or do you consider these allegations to be entirely baseless, with the actual killer already behind bars? Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. 20-year-old Alta Apatanco faced significant challenges in 1971. After separating from Melissa's father, she was raising her 21-month-old daughter, Melissa Highsmith, on her own. To support them, she worked as a waitress in Fort Worth, Texas, but struggled to find reliable childcare. In her search, she placed an ad in a local newspaper for a babysitter and received a response from a woman who offered to care for Melissa at her home. Due to her urgent need for childcare, Alta didn't have the opportunity to meet the woman before hiring her. On August 23, 1971, she left Melissa with her roommate while she went to work, arranging for the babysitter to pick her up. The babysitter arrived as scheduled, and the roommate handed over Melissa. According to her, the woman was well-dressed and wore white gloves. However, the babysitter did not return with Melissa at the agreed-upon time. She did not return at all, and Alta called the police. The search for Melissa would drag on for decades, eventually becoming one of Fort Worth's oldest missing persons cases. Alta would endure not only heartbreak over her daughter vanishing, but also suspicion that she had done something to her daughter and created the story about the babysitter to cover up what she had done. She eventually reconciled with Melissa's father, Jeffrey Highsmith, after they worked together to search for their daughter and had 4 more children. Alta and Jeffrey never gave up hope that they would find Melissa, dropping everything to travel across the country to chase down potential leads as they came up. Over the years, they identified several women who they believed could have been Melissa, only to be disappointed to learn that they were not once DNA tests were conducted. The Highsmith family regularly held vigils for Melissa on her birthday, November 6th. They held one for her on November 6th, 2022, her 53rd birthday. Later that same day, they received the clue that would help them finally find Melissa after more than 51 years, when Melissa's father, Jeffrey, received a notification from the commercial DNA website 23andMe. The notification showed that Jeffrey had matched with someone who had also submitted their DNA to the site based on the amount of DNA Jeffrey shared with this person. She appeared to be his granddaughter, but it was no one he actually knew. The family then turned to an amateur genealogist who used Ancestry.com and public records to locate and contact the previously unknown granddaughter's adoptive father. He remembered the name of his daughter's biological father and the first name of her biological mother. This led the genealogist to a marriage certificate and the full name of the woman's biological mother. The Highsmiths found her on Facebook and sent her a message, telling her they believed they were her family. The woman they contacted was 53-year-old Melanie Walden. Upon reading the Facebook message, Melanie initially did not believe that she could be Melissa and thought that the message could be part of a scam. However, when she was told about a birthmark Melissa had on her back, she became open to the idea, as she had a birthmark in the same spot. Melanie confronted the woman she believed to be her mother, who then admitted that she had purchased Melanie for $500 back in 1972 and that at some point she had realized that Melanie was the baby Melissa whose kidnapping had been featured in the local media. DNA testing later confirmed that Melanie was Melissa Highsmith, and she was reunited with her family at the end of November 2022. Melissa's life as Melanie had been difficult. She believed the woman who raised her was her biological mother, but that she had regretted having her. She had an abusive childhood that led to her running away from home as a teenager. She endured multiple failed marriages and was arrested on several occasions. By the time she was 19, she had given birth to 3 children, all of whom were taken from her custody and put up for adoption. By the time her family located her, Melanie's life had dramatically improved. She became very religious, which in turn led to her making money by cleaning her church. She expanded on that work by beginning to clean houses as well. In April of 2022, she got married again to a man named John Brown, who she considers to be her soulmate. Given her difficult upbringing and poor relationship with the people she knew as her mother and stepfather, learning that she had loving parents and siblings who had spent decades searching for her was very emotional for her. While the statute of limitations for the kidnapping has long since passed, police in Fort Worth are still investigating the case. Melanie looks forward to spending more time with her family, especially her mother, with whom she shared an immediate connection. She plans on using her birth name of Melissa and wants to have a new marriage ceremony with her husband so that her father can walk her down the aisle. On the evening of January 24, 1980, around 6:50 p.m., the Barton County Sheriff's Office was called to a home in the Nelson Trailer Park just west of Great Bend, Kansas. When they arrived, they were met with a bloody scene and the body of a young woman who had been shot multiple times. The young woman was 23-year-old Mary Robin Walter. Her body had been discovered by her husband, with whom she had a 5-year-old daughter, Pamela. At the time of her murder, Robin was a nursing student at Barton County Community College. Multiple law enforcement agencies, including the Kansas Bureau of Investigation and the Great Bend Police Department, worked on the case alongside the sheriff's office. Despite numerous interviews and the identification of a person of interest, they were not able to identify enough evidence to file charges against anyone for Robin's murder. In April of 2022, Detective Sergeant Adam Hales of the Barton County Sheriff's Office began looking at Robin's case while he was recovering from COVID. Looking at the files, he realized that some information had been overlooked and some information had been added to the file later on but not brought to the attention of the initial investigators. 2 more detectives were assigned to investigate the case further with him. In October of 2022, their investigation uncovered new information in the case, which led to them submitting Robin's case to Barton County Attorney Levi Morris for review. He reviewed the case over the following month and obtained an arrest warrant for murder in the 2nd degree in connection to Robin's murder. On December 8, 2022, 68-year-old Stephen Hanks was arrested in Oxford, Kansas, and taken to the Barton County Jail. He is currently being held in lieu of a $500,000 bond. Hanks had been one of Robin's neighbors at the time of her murder and had been the early person of interest in the case. He had been arrested in 1981 for rape, battery, robbery, and burglary and was incarcerated from 1983 until 1993. Authorities are not disclosing what the new evidence that finally led to his arrest is out of concern for jeopardizing the ongoing criminal proceedings. They believe that because the case was solved after 42 years 10 months, it is the oldest homicide arrest in the history of the state of Kansas and one of the oldest cases to be solved with an arrest rather than just a posthumous identification in the United States. Hanks being charged with the murder did not come as a shock to Robin's family, who had long believed he was our killer. Robin's daughter Pamela says she had already chosen to forgive Hanks years before he was charged with her mother's murder. After years of nightmares about the death of her mother, Pamela has mentally blocked out a lot of the details of her mother's murder, choosing to focus instead on the happy memories she has of Robin, like her mother teaching her how to brush her teeth. Pamela continues to wear her mother's wedding ring. Robin's niece, Leslie Schrag, issued a statement on behalf of the family following the arrest of Hanks. It read in part, "We are grateful for detectives' efforts to bring Robin's murderer to justice. Robin was truly beautiful inside and out. This world was robbed of her presence, and we will never know how that has shaped our lives. Friday's news is bittersweet. Many of those who knew Robin are gone. Her parents, husband, and a sister will not get to share in our collective relief that Robin's case will have a conclusion." 20-year-old Claire Gravel was a native of North Andover, Massachusetts. According to her friends, she was kind and smart and had a sweet smile. In 1986, Claire was a sophomore at Salem State College. On June 29, 1986, she played in a softball game and then went out with her team to Major McLeish's pub on Washington Street in Salem. Claire left the pub around 1 a.m. on June 30th, although what happened to her after that is unclear. A friend claimed to have given her a ride back to the rooming house on Loring Street where she was living, but there were no sightings of her there and police were never able to independently verify this claim. Another witness said they saw Claire outside the pub arguing with a man before getting into his car. 3 workers discovered Claire's body on the afternoon of June 30th in the woods off of Route 128 in Beverly. She had been strangled to death. The case went cold within days, with one investigator already telling the media they were at a stalemate in the investigation as early as July 5th. Inaccurate rumors of a white truck being connected to the crime and of Claire having been severely beaten led to numerous tips that did not further the investigation being called in. It would be more than 36 years before charges were brought against a suspect in Claire's case. On August 24, 2022, Essex District Attorney Jonathan Blodgett announced that a grand jury had just indicted 63-year-old John Carey for Claire's murder. He was arraigned on October 21st, appearing in court via video conference, and plead not guilty. Carey was already incarcerated in Massachusetts, serving a 20-year sentence due to be completed in 2027. This sentence stemmed from a conviction for attempted murder and home invasion. He attempted to strangle the wife of one of his friends to death in her home and was only stopped when the victim's 12-year-old son came upon the attack and helped his mother fight Carey off. Carey was tied to Claire's case thanks to DNA. He had been compelled to provide a sample of his DNA when he was incarcerated, so his DNA profile was in the database when investigators later ran a DNA profile they found on Claire's tank top through the system. The tank top had been made into a figure 8 and used to strangle Claire. Claire's father, brothers, and sister-in-law were in court for Carey's arraignment. After the court proceedings were complete, Bob Gravel told the media that Claire was always on his mind and he was heading to the cemetery to tell her what had transpired in court that day. 79-year-old Lucille Holgren lived in the Galt, California area for 25 years, having previously lived in Ohio. She spent most of those years living with her husband, Frank. But in May of 1986, she was living alone because Frank had passed away due to Alzheimer's disease 7 months earlier. She was the loving mother of 2 grown sons. She had a kind and sweet personality and loved taking care of others. Children in her neighborhood were always welcome in her house for cookies and lemonade during the summer. She had a strong religious faith and was active at her church. Her friends were therefore concerned when Lucille failed to attend church one Sunday. The following day, May 23, 1986, 2 of her friends went to her home to check on her. They were able to get inside through a sliding glass door, which they found partially opened. Inside the home, they found Lucille's body, which had visible severe injuries. They immediately left and drove to the Galt Police Department to get help. Lucille's autopsy showed that she had been sexually assaulted and had died as a result of being stabbed in the chest and strangled. The coroner placed her time of death as between 2 to 5 days before her body was found. A large amount of evidence was collected from Lucille's home and dozens of interviews were conducted. However, no arrest was made in the case. Almost 36 years later, in January of 2022, the Sacramento County Crime Lab re-examined the evidence preserved from Lucille's crime scene. DNA was found in scrapings taken from underneath Lucille's fingernails and from bodily fluids found on Lucille's bedding. When the profile sequence from that DNA was run through the criminal database, a match was found. On May 17, 2022, the Galt Police Department issued a press release identifying Lucille's killer as Terry Lee Roy Bramble, who had been 32 years old at the time of the murder. His DNA was in the database due to the fact that he was a registered sex offender because of a 1992 conviction for sexual assault in San Joaquin County. He was a longtime transient in the Galt area who lived under a Highway 99 bridge for many years. Unfortunately, he died of natural causes in 2011 and cannot be prosecuted for Lucille's murder. Lucille's oldest son, Frank, passed away before his mother's killer was identified, but her younger son, Henry, survived to see the identification. He described her as his champion, who he still misses every day. He was not sure he would ever see the case solved and is grateful for the efforts of everyone who worked to solve the case. Diane Dawn was a free spirit from New Jersey who spent a year as an exchange student in Austria. For years older than her sister, Victoria, the two remained very close. Diane's time abroad meant she finished her final year of high school a year late, overlapping with Victoria's senior year. During that time, Diane not only helped Victoria with subjects like music and foreign languages, but also assisted her in skipping school for ski trips together. An accomplished violinist, Diane eventually followed Victoria to California, where they could reconnect. By 1988, 29-year-old Diane was living in an apartment complex on Graves Avenue in Santee, California, with her 2-year-old son, Mark. Mark and Victoria's daughter, Christine, were born just a few months apart, allowing Diane and Victoria to spend quality time with their children. Diane worked for the San Diego Transit Corporation, where she became the first female radio repair technician. However, she failed to show up for work on Monday, May 2, 1988. Concerned, a coworker went to her apartment to check on her. Upon entering, they found Diane deceased in a back room, having been stabbed in the chest and also bludgeoned. She was nude, but an examination of her body did not find any signs that she had been sexually assaulted. Diane's young son was found wandering in a nearby area of the apartment complex, thankfully unharmed. The San Diego County Sheriff's Department did not find any signs of forced entry into Diane's apartment, nor did they find a motive for anyone to want to kill Diane. Diane's son Mark was adopted by a family friend and grew up with 2 older brothers. He remained close with his birth mother's family and regularly saw his aunt, cousins, and grandparents. Even with a loving adoptive family and a strong relationship with his biological family, Mark still sometimes felt alone as he grew up, knowing he had lost his mother. As years passed without a resolution to Diane's case, her family began losing hope. "I didn't think anything was ever going to come of this. I thought I, myself, was going to go to my grave," not knowing Diane's sister, Victoria, would tearfully say years later. Investigators did not forget about Diane's case and tried to use new technology to solve it as it became available to them. Scrapings from under Diane's fingernails had been preserved, and in late 2000, they were tested in hopes of developing a DNA profile of Diane's killer. A profile was developed, but when it was uploaded to a national criminal database, no match was found. A hair follicle had also been found in Diane's hand, and a new technology was used to process it in the summer of 2010. However, when a DNA profile was developed, there was still no match to it in any database. Authorities then turned to genetic genealogy as a possible avenue for finally solving the case in May of 2020. The San Diego County Sheriff's Department utilized genealogy databases that give users the option of making their DNA profiles available for comparison to law enforcement. Close relatives of the killer were not in the database, which meant the process was very labor-intensive for investigators as they created family trees of his more distant relatives trying to identify him. Investigators contacted numerous individuals they believed to be distantly related to the killer, asking for information about their family histories, and ultimately constructed 9 family trees containing over 1,300 people related to the killer, either by blood or marriage. The massive and detailed effort did eventually identify a potential suspect, but he had passed away since the murder. His children agreed to provide samples of their DNA. Testing on these samples confirmed that their father was the individual whose DNA was found under Diane's nails and in her hand. On March 16, 2022, authorities announced the identity of the suspect, Warren Robertson. Robertson, along with his wife and several other relatives, had lived in the same apartment complex as Diane in 1988. Authorities have not been able to determine if he and Diane knew each other prior to the murder. They both enjoyed racing and attended local stock car races at the nearby El Cajon Speedway. Robertson was never a suspect in the case prior to his DNA being matched to the DNA from the crime scene, thanks to genetic genealogy. He was not mentioned in any reports from the initial investigation, and he does not appear to have been questioned in the initial canvassing of the apartment complex in 1988. Robertson was a native of Arkansas. He worked as a tow truck driver at the time of Diane's murder. He did have a criminal record, but only for low-level property crimes, not for any other violent offenses. Robertson and his family moved away from the apartment complex shortly after Diane was killed to Lakeside, California. They then moved again the following year, this time to Indiana. Robertson died in a house fire there in 1999 at the age of 39. At the press conference announcing Robertson's identification, Diane's sister recounted memories of her beloved sister and thanked members of law enforcement for never giving up on the case. She said that the day she learned a suspect had finally been identified was the best day of her life, aside from the days her children were born. Diane's now adult son, Mark, provided a video statement played at the press conference. While he was too young at the time of her death to have many strong memories of his mother, he stated that everyone who had ever spoken to him about his mother told him how good of a person she was. He likes to think he inherited those positive traits from her and tries to be a good person, to be like his mother. The answers that my family received, it's closure. And closure is everything, even after so much time has passed, Mark said in the video. And now I have a story to tell the world and tell people who cross my path. In 1980, 19-year-olds Tim Hack and Kelly Drew were high school sweethearts engaged to be married. Tim lived with his family in Hebron, a small town in Jefferson County, while Kelly resided in Fort Atkinson, also in Jefferson County. The couple met at Fort Atkinson High School. Kelly was a kind and beautiful young woman with a passion for cosmetology, and Tim was a strong, hardworking farm boy. Both were cherished by their friends and family for their kind-hearted nature. As a couple, Tim and Kelly were seen as role models for their peers. After graduating high school, Tim began his farming career, relying on his best friend, a tractor he affectionately called the Lonesome Loser. Meanwhile, Kelly had just graduated from beauty school in 1980, aspiring to become a hairstylist and beautician. On August 9, 1980, they attended a wedding reception at Concord House in Wisconsin, planning to meet friends afterward and head to a carnival, but they never arrived. The last sighting of them was around 11 p.m. that night when they left the reception. By the next morning, August 10th, when they still hadn't been seen or heard from, Tim's father, David Hack, filed missing person reports for both. That same day, David discovered Tim's brown Oldsmobile parked at Concord House, locked with Tim's wallet containing $67, his jacket, and his checkbook inside. On August 15th, searchers found Kelly's pants and underwear by the roadside, about 3 miles from Concord House, with male bodily fluids present. They also found some ropes by the roadside that had been knotted by someone who appeared to have military experience. The discovery of these articles of clothing shifted the case drastically. Suddenly, it was no longer a matter of finding a couple who might have just decided to take off and have a romantic getaway. It was now a matter of trying to find them alive, because they were likely in danger. About 2 months later, some squirrel hunters from Milwaukee were out in the Isonia, Wisconsin area, about 7 miles from the Concord House. While walking through a wooded area along a railroad track parallel to Highway 16, east of Watertown, they found the badly decomposed remains of Kelly Drew. She was completely naked. About 100 yards away, they found a fully clothed male body that was identified as the body of Tim Hack. The case, now officially a homicide, was dubbed the Sweetheart Murders. The cause of death was not immediately apparent because investigators found no murder weapon at the scene. However, upon examination, the medical examiner found stab wounds on Tim's body and ligature marks on Kelly, suggesting death by stabbing. The bodily fluids found on Kelly's clothes also suggested assault. The Sweetheart Murders had all the elements of a sensational story, so it started making headlines across the country. 2 teenage sweethearts appeared to have been murdered in a senseless act of violence, and police could not identify the killer or killers. Their investigation began, while interviewing everyone who knew the couple, to find out if anyone might have hated them enough to kill them. Police also interviewed everyone who attended the wedding reception, including the Concord House staff who worked there that night. One of the questioned workers was Edward Wayne Edwards, a handyman working at the Concord House. Edward, who lived in a campground adjacent to the Concord House near Interstate 94, claimed that he had not seen the couple, and that he was not even at the Concord House around the time the couple went missing. He claimed that he was deer hunting in the nearby woods. However, Police noticed that he had a broken nose. When they asked him about it, he claimed he had gotten it during his deer hunting trip. It seemed weird to the investigators because this was August and deer hunting season in Wisconsin was around November. After the police questioned him, Edward moved his wife and his 5 children away from Wisconsin in September 1980. Meanwhile, the most promising lead investigators were eyewitness accounts of a dirty-looking van that had been parked next to Tim's car in the Concord House parking lot. Witnesses claimed that they noticed the van suddenly driving away suspiciously around the time Tim and Kelly were last seen. Edward had a van that fit that description, where he often kept a .357 revolver. But without a plate number or strong evidence connecting him to the crime scene, police could do very little to follow up on that lead. And like that, all other leads in the investigation dried up, the case file was shelved, and the case went cold. In 2028, 20 years after the murders of Tim Heck and Kelly Drew, Richard Luall from the Wisconsin Department of Justice, one of the investigators in charge of the original investigation, asked for the case to be reopened. For almost 30 years, Luall had been unable to let go of the case. And now that he was close to retirement, he wanted to do everything in his power to close the case. In an interview, he said, "As I was reaching my retirement age, DNA was making drastic leaps and bounds. He felt more confident pursuing the case now because of technological and scientific advancements of the last couple of decades. His newfound confidence was reflected in how he approached the case with vigor." Luall had a hunch that the police had already interviewed the killer in the earlier stages of the investigation, and that the person's name would be on file. He just had to find it. After 2 months of digging through the files, witness statements, and interview recordings, one name stood out to Luall: Edward Wayne Edwards. Not only did Edward have the opportunity and means to commit the crimes, but the fact that he moved his entire family out of Wisconsin shortly after police interviewed him raised red flags. Luall and a team of cold case investigators decided to follow up on his hunch that Edward was the potential killer. When they interviewed Edward's neighbors from when he lived in Concord, Wisconsin, they learned that Edward had been a very difficult person to live with. He was short-tempered and volatile, a restless man who often beat his wife and children on a whim. They said he was basically a monster. His son, John Edwards, who was now 37 years old in 2008, described him as a troubled man, saying, "I don't think he knew how to control his emotions. There was some type of rage there." In 2009, April Balasiel, Edward's daughter, contacted authorities with disturbing information. She said she knew some things about the cold case murder of Tim Heck and Kelly Drew that she believed could help investigators close the case. However, this information that she had implicated one of the men closest to her life, her father, Edward Wayne Edwards, a former Marine with a long history of crime. April was a curious child growing up, and her father's unusual life was the most fascinating puzzle to her. Throughout her life, she had questions about how her father lived and why the family had to move around so often. One day, when she was now an adult, she came across the news article about the unsolved murders of Tim Heck and Kelly Drew, and she remembered that they had moved from Concord, Wisconsin around that time. The puzzle was finally falling into place, and she just knew she had to contact authorities. Edward Wayne Edwards was born in Akron, Ohio in 1933. He lost his parents at a young age and had to live in an orphanage run by nuns. Edward's time at the orphanage was marked with physical and emotional abuse, ultimately shaping him into a restless and rebellious teenager. He had several run-ins with the police for petty crimes like shoplifting and breaking and entering, and by 17 he was serving time at a juvenile detention center. By 1951, when Edward was 18, he was released from juvenile detention on the condition that he join the U.S. Marines. But after just a few months as a Marine, Edward disappeared and had to be dishonorably discharged. He wasn't ready to leave the life of crime behind, because Edward soon found himself in jail again for robbery. By 1955, when he was 22, he escaped from jail in Akron and traveled across different states robbing gas stations. Edward would spend the rest of his 20s and 30s as a fugitive, drifting around the country while doing odd jobs here and there, working as a ship docker, vacuum cleaner retailer, and handyman. From his autobiography, it is easy to tell that Edward enjoyed his notoriety during this period. According to him, he never tried to use an alias or disguise his identity while committing his crimes because he wanted to be famous. In 1960, at 27, Edward was once again in prison, this time for attempting to impersonate a federal officer. However, he escaped from the Portland, Oregon jail, where he was being held, prompting the FBI to place him on its 10 most wanted list in 1961. In 1962, authorities caught up with Edward and imprisoned him in the United States Penitentiary, Leavenworth, but he was paroled in 1967 for good behavior. In his memoir, he attributed his growth to the influence of a benevolent card at Leavenworth. After his parole, Edward got married and became a motivational speaker. In 1972, at age 39, Edward appeared on 2 television shows, To Tell the Truth and What's My Line? That same year, he released his autobiography, The Metamorphosis of a Criminal, the true life story of Ed Edwards. It seemed like the stars were finally lining up for Edward. He had beaten the system. He was on his way to success. Unfortunately, Edward's good luck did not last long. In 1977, he committed his first murder. His victims were 21-year-old Billy Lavaco and his girlfriend, 18-year-old Judith Straub, residents of Sterling, Ohio. Billy and Judith went on a date on August 7, 1977, but never returned. Later that day, Judith's car was found in the parking lot of Silver Creek Metro Park with her shoes and purse still inside. The following day, August 8th, Norton Police, assisted by family members and a National Guard helicopter, launched a search for Billy and Judith. The search party found their bodies in the high weeds near the Metro Park. They had been shot point blank with a 20-gauge shotgun. At the time, investigators could not connect Billy and Judith's case to Edward, so he got away with the murders. These murders also established a pattern that would continue with the murders of Tim and Kelly. Meanwhile, by 1982, when he was 49, Edward was back behind bars in Pennsylvania for arson, but he was still proud of his criminal accomplishments because in 1993, he wrote a letter to the FBI requesting his criminal and history records for cities in 19 states. The records were supposedly for a new book he was writing about criminals he met while in prison, such as Tony Provenzano, Charles Manson, and Jimmy Hoffa. In 1996, Edward, 63 years old, committed his third murder. His victim was his foster son, 25-year-old Danny Boy Edwards, who lived with him in Burton, Ohio for 7 years. Before he met his grisly end, Danny Boy was a soldier in the U.S. Army. Edward somehow convinced him to abscond from the Army and return home. When he got home, Edward tricked him into entering the nearby woods and then killed him with 2 gunshots to the face. Edward left Danny Boy's body in a shallow grave. A hunter eventually found it there and alerted the authorities. But like his first set of murders, Edward also got away with murdering Danny Boy for the next couple of years. People close to Edward, like his son John and his daughter April, described him as a troubled man. He was extremely abusive to his wife and children, resulting in his children moving away from home as soon as possible to escape his abuse. Investigators believed Edward fit the bill for the stereotypical serial killer. He had a long history of crime, he was physically violent with his family members, and the fact that he wrote a book about his crimes showed that he was a narcissist. Edward also had military experience, so he would have known how to tie the knot on the ropes investigators believed were used to strangle Kelly. In addition, Edward's history of arson fits perfectly with the image of someone extremely controlling. By the time he was in his mid-70s, he was overweight and had to move around in a wheelchair depending on an oxygen tank to breathe. So, his neighbors in Louisville, Kentucky had no idea that behind his elderly facade lay an evil mind that had done so much damage. However, with new evidence in April's statements, investigators now had a more solid reason to believe Edward might have been involved in the murders. They had to visit him. When investigators got to his home in Louisville and initially began questioning him, Edward denied knowing anything about the murders of Tim Hack and Kelly Drew. He claimed he hadn't heard anything about them going missing, although he had been questioned about it in 1980. But while investigators doubled down and pressed him more, Edward confessed that he had drank some beers at the Concord house on that fateful night and that he may have seen the couple while he was drinking. He also said, contrary to his earlier statement, he had not been deer hunting that night. After the interview, investigators asked if they could take a swab of his saliva for DNA testing. Edward confidently said they could, believing the DNA test would not reveal anything he did not want investigators to know about. When the state crime lab tested Edward's DNA sample, it matched the DNA found on Kelly's pants. In 2009, Edwards had settled in a trailer park in Louisville, Kentucky. He was pleasant and friendly to his neighbors, and none of them suspected that he had such a dark history. That is until police picked him up and brought him to Wisconsin on July 31, 2009. He was charged with the murders of Tim Hack and Kelly Drew. While he was being interviewed, Edward was confronted with the results of the DNA test. Investigators asked him to explain how his bodily fluids came to be on Kelly's clothes. Edward started stuttering, cooking up a story about how he and Kelly had gotten intimate earlier that evening of August 9, 1980. But the act was consensual. He was shifting in his seat, moving his hands every which way. When he sensed the investigators were not buying his performance, he sighed and muttered something under his breath. After replaying the interview recording 100 of times, investigators were confident they had heard what Edward said. "Damn it, I killed her." It was as good a confession as any. The gig was up for Edward, and he decided to plead guilty to the murder of Tim Hack and Kelly Drew. In April 2010, Edward Wayne Edwards was convicted of the 1980 Sweetheart murders and given 2 life sentences to run concurrently. Although Edward had asked to be executed, Wisconsin had no death penalty. But according to retired homicide detective Phil Waters, Edward had been in and out of prison. He knows what life is like. He's not a guy that wants to be sitting in a prison ward somewhere and dying a slow death. So hoping to convince the state to give him the death penalty, Edward wrote a letter to the Ohio prosecutor's office, saying, "You're going to want to put a needle in my arm." In 2010, Edward confessed to the murders of 21-year-old Billy Lavaco and 18-year-old Judith Straub. But it turned out that when he committed the murders in 1977, the death penalty was unconstitutional, so he did not get his wish. Instead, he was given a life sentence for each murder. But he still had one trick up his sleeve. In 2011, during a jailhouse interview, Edward confessed to killing his foster son, 25-year-old Danny Boy Edwards. His motive was the $250,000 life insurance policy he was set to receive upon Danny Boy's death. This time, his plan worked. On March 8, 2011, Edward was sentenced to death for the murder of Danny Boy Edwards. Although he was only convicted of 5 murders, police speculate that he could have at least 9 to 15 more undiscovered victims. In the book titled Peyton, Ellen, Files, the author Phil Stanford suggested that Edward might have been responsible for the murders of Beverly Allen and Larry Peyton, which took place in Portland, Oregon in 1960. In March 2017, Detective Chon Garcia from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, one of the investigators in charge of the Sweetheart murders, suggested that Edward might have been responsible for 15 other murders, including the famous Zodiac killings. Retired homicide detective John Cameron also believed Edward was responsible for the Zodiac killings and other high-profile unsolved cases. But these claims have not been proven as of yet, so they are considered conspiracy theories. On April 7, 2011, Edward Edwards passed away at the Corrections Medical Center, Columbus, Ohio at age 77. His death was of natural causes, a relatively merciful ending to a vicious crime spree that left 5 dead and dozens racked with grief. Edward escaped execution by lethal injection, which had been set for August 31, 2011. Although Edward was eventually arrested, and he ultimately did not get away with the murders of Tim and Kelly, their family members have not exactly found relief in that. Kelly's mother, Norma Walker, said instead of getting closure, Edward's arrest ripped open old wounds. She said, "You hoped this day would come, but now that it's here, it's really hard. Everything starts all over again. All the memories come back. He robbed me of my daughter, robbed me of my Christmases, birthdays, weddings, everything families do together." As for Tim's family, the fact that their son and his girlfriend's killer had been found was enough. Tim's father, David, said he was just glad it's over and was grateful for the DNA technology that confirmed Edward was the killer. April Balasillo, Edward's daughter whose tip helped close the cold case, now spends her time trying to help the families of victims with unsolved cases find closure. Through her podcast, The Clearing, she investigates cold murder cases and tries to get authorities to reopen them. Tim Heck and Kelly Drew had a bright future ahead of them that was violently snatched away by their killer, Edward Edwards. Edward, the serial killer, had nothing personal against the couple. They just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, which makes it all the more tragic. Although Edward ultimately got arrested and sentenced to death for his crimes, some believe he escaped justice by dying of natural causes just weeks before he was scheduled to be executed. What do you think about that? Did Edward get what he deserved? On November 17, 1978, an individual was out looking for firewood near Lake of the Woods in the Wyman National Forest in southern Oregon. While they were doing so, they came across a gruesome scene approximately half a mile off of Dead Indian Road near Oregon, Route 140. They discovered the badly decomposed body of a young man. Members of the Klamath County Sheriff's Office quickly responded to the scene. The following day, as they continued searching for clues as part of their investigation into the young man's death, they discovered the body of a young woman. Her body had also undergone extensive decomposition. The remains of a small dog were also found. The man and the woman had been haphazardly buried in separate shallow graves. Based on the callous way the bodies had been disposed of, authorities were able to immediately tell that whoever had placed the bodies there had absolutely no respect for the individuals. The male victim's wallet was found amongst his clothes, allowing authorities to quickly identify him as 19-year-old Kirk Leonard Wiseman. The female victim was soon identified as his girlfriend, 17-year-old Cynthia Lynn Freyer. Their autopsy showed that they had both been shot in the head multiple times with a .22 caliber firearm and that Cynthia had been raped. The couple lived in Sepulveda, California, a neighborhood in Los Angeles that has since been renamed North Hills. They had been missing since September. The couple had been in Everett, Washington visiting family along with their brown and white terrier who traveled with them in a carrier. They left Everett on September 23, 1978 to slowly make their way back to California and took a flight from Seattle to Eugene, Oregon. Kirk and Cynthia were known to hitchhike regularly, and witnesses were found to support the theory that they had been hitchhiking around southern Oregon prior to their murders. After arriving in Eugene on 23rd, they hitchhiked to Roseburg and spent the night in a motel there. A witness came forward reporting that they had then picked the couple up hitchhiking and dropped them off at a restaurant in Grants Pass. The couple had plans to visit Crater Lake at some point during their travels before they returned to California because it was somewhere Cynthia had always wanted to visit. She had traveled in the area with her family the year before, but bad weather had forced them to cancel their plans to visit Crater Lake and made Cynthia even more determined to see it. One of the few items that was discovered along with the victims' bodies was a sign that read K Falls. The couple may have used the sign while hitchhiking, looking for a ride to Klamath Falls. Investigators came to believe that the couple had been killed by someone who picked them up hitchhiking either while they were traveling from Ashland to Klamath Falls or while they were traveling back to Ashland after visiting Klamath Falls. They were never able to find evidence confirming that the couple had made it to Klamath Falls. Carl Burkhart was a detective with the Klamath County Sheriff's Office in 1978 and one of the first investigators to respond to the scene when Kirk's body was first discovered. He eventually went on to become the sheriff of Klamath County. He maintained his interest in the case until he retired in 2001. Several other investigators would work on the case for the next 2 decades, with the collective efforts of everyone who worked on the case ultimately leading to it being solved. The evidence from the case was carefully preserved in 1978, meaning that when technology to isolate and process DNA evidence became more commonly used by law enforcement decades later, the evidence was still available for forensic examination. Investigators began looking at the case and exploring the possibility of DNA evidence being found on some of the preserved items in 2011. However, it would not be until 2019 that the crime lab was able to identify DNA on any of the pieces of evidence. DNA from an unknown male was located on pieces of Cynthia's clothing that had been submitted for examination. The items were sent to another lab to confirm the findings of the crime lab. The second lab produced the same results. The DNA profile was run through criminal databases, but no match was found. Authorities then turned to genetic genealogy and worked with Marshall University to prepare a sample to submit to Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia. Parabon used this sample to attempt to identify a suspect based on the amount of DNA the sample had in common with individuals who had submitted their DNA to a genealogy database. They ultimately were able to identify a potential suspect in a report they generated during the summer of 2021. Authorities learned that the potential suspect had died in Texas in 1996, making it more difficult for them to confirm it was his DNA found on Cynthia's clothes. They then turned to the man's ex-wife and children. While they were upset by the idea that he was a murderer, they agreed to cooperate with the investigation, prioritizing Kirk and Cynthia's family's need for answers over their own discomfort. They provided samples of their DNA, which helped confirm that it was the suspect's DNA found on the evidence. They also provided additional information important to the investigation during interviews. They confirmed that the suspect had lived in the Klamath Falls area from 1976 until 1982, during which time he was employed at a local lumber mill. His family was very familiar with the area where Kirk and Cynthia's bodies were found, stating that they had gone camping with the suspect in that area regularly and had routinely driven through the area on the way to visit family friends as well. At a press conference on January 6, 2022, authorities announced that the suspect whose DNA had been found on Cynthia's clothing was Ray Mason Whitson Jr. He did not have a criminal record. According to Klamath County District Attorney Eve Costello, the DNA evidence was strong enough for Whitson to be prosecuted based off of it, had he not died before it was discovered. Detective Dan Towery met with Kirk and Cynthia's loved ones prior to the press conference. Both families requested that he publicly express their gratitude to Whitson's family for their willingness to cooperate with the investigation and bring them answers and some measure of closure, despite the emotional toll doing so took on them. While Whitson cannot be prosecuted or found guilty in a court of law, the investigation is formally being suspended as prosecutors and investigators believe they have identified the only individual responsible for Kirk and Cynthia's murders. With the case formally closed, several personal items that belonged to the victims that had been held as evidence for more than 4 decades can now be returned to their families. These items include postcards, jewelry, and an unmailed letter addressed to Cynthia's parents, written shortly before Cynthia was killed and found with her body. The letter described how much fun she and Kirk had in Washington State and detailed some of their hopes and plans for the future. The letter will finally be delivered to Cynthia's mother, more than 43 years after Cynthia wrote it. On Friday, April 19, 1991, 12-year-old David Hibbs was looking forward to a slightly longer weekend. It was an early dismissal day at school, and he got off the bus, arriving at his home in the 1200 block of Spencer Drive in the Croydon section of Bristol Township, Pennsylvania, around 1:05 p.m. David had received his report card that day and was excited to share that he had made the honor roll. However, upon arrival, he found smoke pouring from the windows of his house. Panic set in as he realized his mother was inside, her car parked in the driveway. He rushed to the door, desperate to help her, but was unable to get past the flames and heavy smoke filling the kitchen. In a state of distress, he ran outside, screaming for someone to assist his mother. A neighbor, who was doing yard work, heard him and called for help. While waiting for firefighters to arrive, the neighbor and a nearby concrete worker attempted to enter the home but were also thwarted by the smoke. David informed them that his mother might be napping in her bedroom, prompting them to break the window in that room. But when they looked inside, she was not in the room. Half a dozen neighbors came to help as well, using their garden hoses to try to contain the fire. Tragically, David's mother, 36-year-old Joy Hibbs, was inside the house. Her charred body was discovered in David's bedroom. Authorities initially assumed she had been killed in what they believed to be an accidental fire. However, it was determined that 3 fires, one in the hallway, one in the kitchen, and one in the bedroom where Joy had been found, had been set deliberately. The autopsy performed on Joy's body the day after her death showed that she had been murdered. There were no signs of smoke inhalation in her lungs, meaning she was dead before the fire started. She had been stabbed in the chest and neck 5 times, beaten badly enough that she had broken ribs, and strangled, most likely with the computer cord found wrapped around her body. The fire appeared to have been set to destroy evidence in the murder. Joy was originally from Central Florida and kept her southern charm even after she moved north. She loved to spend time outdoors fishing and gardening. She and her husband, Charlie, celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary 6 days before she was killed. The couple had 2 children, and Joy was a devoted and loving mother. Her daughter, Angie, who was 16 years old at the time of the murder, would later describe her mother as her best friend. Joy worked as a medical assistant and was highly regarded by everyone in her community. Joy's husband, Charlie, was investigated for involvement in the case, but ultimately cleared of suspicion. He was at a job site in Northeast Philadelphia at the time of the murder. He voluntarily underwent a polygraph examination, which he passed and did everything police asked of him. He was devastated by the loss of his wife. "I don't believe in God anymore," he told the Philadelphia Inquirer 2 months after the murder. "If there was a God, this wouldn't have happened. She never hurt anyone in her life. She had me on a diet and not smoking. Now I die tomorrow and I don't care. It doesn't bother me. I'm sick to my stomach all the time." Joy had no known enemies, and authorities had little physical evidence to go on as most of the house had been charred by the fire and then covered in water during the efforts to extinguish it. Investigators looked into Joy's movements on the day she was killed. 2 days a week, including Fridays, the doctor's office where Joy worked open late and stayed open late. She would normally work from 8 a.m. until 2:30 p.m., but on Fridays, she did not have to be at work until 2 p.m., so she had the morning free for her other responsibilities. After getting her children off to school, Joy had gone to the bank to cash her paycheck. Following her death, the contents of her purse were found strewn about her kitchen, and her wallet was found in her couch with no cash in it, indicating that robbery may have been a potential motive for the crime. She left the bank at 9:53 a.m. She then went to the grocery store, with a receipt showing that she checked out at 10:54 a.m. Back at home, Joy was visited by a local minister and a member of his congregation. Joy had expressed interest in joining their church after attending services there on Easter. The 2 visitors were questioned and eliminated as suspects. They were witnessed leaving the home around 11:45. Police, therefore, placed the time of Joy's death as sometime between 11:50 a.m. and 12:50 p.m. During this hour-long of time, multiple witnesses reported seeing one of the few major clues investigators had: a blue Chevrolet Monte Carlo scene parked haphazardly outside of Joy's house. The car had not only been notable because of how poorly it had been parked and the problems it created for drivers on the street, but also because the Hibbs home was at the center of a T-shaped intersection, making the front of their house an unsafe place to park. A potential suspect, who had a disagreement with Joy shortly before she was killed, did drive such a vehicle. Joy and her husband had started occasionally using marijuana in the late 1980s. Charlie usually obtained the small amount of marijuana they required from a coworker, but Joy had begun purchasing from a former neighbor, a man who drove a blue Monte Carlo. He had recently sold her what turned out to be just stems and seeds. Joy had tried to return it and get her money back, but he had refused. This individual refused to take a polygraph examination, later stating that his attorney had advised him against it because he suffered from carpal tunnel syndrome and nerve damage in his shoulder, which he said could interfere with the results of the test. Police also believed this individual had an alibi for the time of the murder and that a disagreement over a transaction valued at somewhere between $20.40 was not a sufficient motive for murder. While he was considered a person of interest, there was not enough evidence to charge him with Joy's murder. Joy's family, however, was not convinced of his innocence. In 2014, Joy's son David stated that he believed police knew who the killer was but had botched the investigation because they did not know what they were doing. In 2021, Charlie Hibbs, who is now 66 and living in Washington State, dipped into his retirement funds to offer a $25,000 reward in the case. The 3 decades that had passed since the murder had not eroded his desire to get justice for his wife. "This is something you can't put behind you. You just learn to live with it," he told the Philadelphia Inquirer. "I'm just reaching out for help. She was a good woman, and she never harmed anyone in her life. She didn't deserve what happened, and neither did my children. His son David and a family friend, who wished to remain anonymous, also contributed money, doubling the reward to $50,000 just a year later. An arrest would finally be made in Joy's case. On May 25, 2022, Bucks County District Attorney Matthew Weintraub announced the arrest of 56-year-old Robert Francis Atkins of Fairless Hills, Pennsylvania. He was charged with murder of the first degree, murder of the second degree, 2 counts of arson, and 2 counts of robbery in connection to Joy's murder. Atkins was the person of interest who drove the blue Monte Carlo and had sold Joy marijuana. He had long been suspected by Joy's family. Following the announcement of the reward in May of 2021 and the media coverage it generated, Joy's case was reopened and eventually sent to a grand jury in January of 2022. One of the witnesses called to testify before the grand jury was April Atkins, the ex-wife of Robert Atkins. She had been contacted by police in connection to Joy's murder in 2014, but told them at the time that she did not know anything about it. Then, in September of 2016, following the deaths of her mother, niece, and significant other, she knew that there was something she needed to make right, and she went to the Bristol Township Police on her own accord. April told authorities that on the day Joy was murdered, her husband had come home with blood all over his clothes. He told her that he had stabbed someone and set their house on fire. He also ordered her to get their 2 young children ready because they were taking an unplanned weekend trip to the Poconos. He threw his clothes into the washing machine and took a shower. April did not want to leave town because she was due to go to work at 3 p.m. Her job required employees to give them at least 2 hours notice for calling out for a shift if they wanted to use paid leave. Records from her employer confirmed that she had called out at 2:15 on April 19, 1991. The Atkins family had already lost their house, 2 doors down from the Hibbs family home, to foreclosure and was living paycheck to paycheck, so going without a day's pay was a major problem. But Atkins insisted that they go. They quickly packed and began driving to a motel in the Poconos. According to April, her husband drove incredibly fast and aggressively the entire drive. When she woke up during that night at the motel, her husband was not there. The next day, he had new sneakers. While they were staying at the motel, he had April dress the kids to take a walk, and they went out to an area behind the motel. Her husband had a bag with him when they started. He disappeared for a while and returned without the bag. The family stayed at the motel from late Friday afternoon until Sunday. Police went to the motel and confirmed that the family was there and accepted the timeline Atkins provided, placing their arrival in the early afternoon, making him appear to have an alibi for the time of Joy's murder when, in fact, he did not. Records from the motel show that the family did not actually check in until 4:53 p.m. Atkins also claimed that the trip had been planned for weeks, a claim his then-wife's last-minute call to work to say she wasn't coming in that day seems to dispute. April stated that she had not come forward because she feared for her life. Robert Atkins had been physically and sexually abusive towards her since she was a teenager. He used drugs, including methamphetamines and steroids, which increased his violent behavior. However, his drug use also led to him becoming a criminal informant with police. He was very close with several officers, had called police after some of the incidents of domestic violence during their marriage, but believed her husband's relationship with the responding department prevented action from being taken against him. While she and Robert were divorced by the time investigators came to see her in 2014, she was still afraid of him and had to be in regular contact with him because their youngest child, their son Gabriel, was still a minor. Gabriel was living with him at the time as well, potentially putting him in harm's way. April cooperated with police by making a recorded phone call to her ex-husband in December of 2021. Portions of this call were played for the grand jury. She told him a fabricated story about how authorities had arrived at her home to question her about Joy's murder, and that as she was making the call, they were interviewing her roommate, to whom April had admitted her ex-husband's involvement in the murder. He told her in a variety of ways to stop talking to police and that the phone was probably being tapped. He also said that he had explained everything recent attention his family was getting from law enforcement had taken a major toll on Gabriel's emotional state. He tearfully admitted on the stand that while talking about the case with his father had stated that I might have done it and stuff happened. Joy's son David also testified before the grand jury. He stated that his mother had confided in him that she had gotten into an argument about marijuana with Atkins just weeks before she was killed. He testified that Atkins told his mother, "I will blow up your house and I will kill you." After hearing testimony over a period of several months, the grand jury recommended that Atkins be charged on May 19, 2022. At his arraignment on May 25th, Atkins was denied bail, and he has been remanded to the Bucks County Correctional Facility. A preliminary hearing in the case is scheduled for June 8th. While Joy's family was not shocked by the identity of the man arrested for her murder, they were grateful he is finally being charged in the case. Following the arrest, they released a statement remembering Joy and thanking the members of the DA's office and the police department, whose recent work had led to Atkins being charged for the murder. The statement also read, "The immense grief and suffering our family has endured over the last 3 decades will never disappear. For 31 years, our family has been haunted by this tragic loss, knowing, without a doubt, that Robert Atkins was the perpetrator. Our family has waited 31 years for justice to prevail." The summer of 1992 was a difficult time for Nona Coble. The 29-year-old was a widow and had lost custody of her 3-year-old son, Josh, 7 months earlier. Nona's sister, Becky, and her husband had custody of the little boy. Nona loved her son very much and was very proud of him. She called her sister every day to check in on Josh. Nona was struggling with a drug problem. While her family did not support her drug use, they still loved her. She loved us and we loved her. Just because you do something wrong doesn't mean you stop loving her, her sister Vicky would later tell the Winston-Salem Journal. Nona was last seen alive on the night of July 6, 1992. She was seen getting into a truck with a man at the Welcome Center on Interstate 85 in Cleveland County, North Carolina, south of Kings Mountain. Her body would be discovered at 6:15 the following morning along the northbound side of Interstate 77 in Surry County, North Carolina. She had been strangled. There were few early leads in Nona's case. The first major suspect for her murder was identified in 1995. Sean Patrick Coble was a truck driver from Asheboro, North Carolina, and was questioned about Nona's murder after a fingerprint tied him to another killing. He denied any involvement in Nona's case. Later that year, police were able to eliminate him as a suspect in Nona's murder based on DNA evidence collected from her body. Coble was later convicted of killing 3 other women and is currently serving 2 life sentences, plus 14 years, in prison. Years later, it would be that same DNA evidence that would lead to investigators finally being able to make an arrest in Nona's case. In April of 2021, special agents from the State Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Investigation Unit and investigators from the Surry County Sheriff's Office began re-examining the physical evidence in the case. Still unable to find a match to the DNA from Nona's body, they began working with Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, the founder of Identifiers International. This effort ultimately led to the identification of a suspect in the case. Was arrested in Diamond Head, Mississippi, and charged with her murder. Was arrested in Diamond Head, Mississippi, and charged with her murder. He is currently being held at the Hancock County Jail awaiting his extradition to North Carolina to face the charges. The investigation is ongoing, and authorities are not releasing any further information at this time. They are also investigating the possibility that Alexander is also responsible for other murders. Melissa Trembley was born on March 1, 1977. Her father was not very involved in her life, and she was her mother's only child. According to her friends, Melissa had a fun and bubbly personality. She was a very tough little girl with a spunky attitude. She already had her own distinct personal style and preferred to have her hair feathered and her clothes to have a funky edge to them. Melissa was featured in a local news story looking for a big sister through the Big Brothers Big Sisters program at the Salem Boys and Girls Club and stated that she wanted to be a secretary when she grew up because she liked to type. In 1988, Melissa and her mother lived in Salem, New Hampshire, and Melissa was a 6th grade student at the Lancaster School. September 11th that year was a Sunday, and that day, 11-year-old Melissa traveled to Lawrence, Massachusetts, a 20-minute drive away from her home, with her mother and her mother's boyfriend. At some point, while the adults were socializing at the LaSalle Social Club on Andover Street, Melissa left the building to go play in the neighborhoods surrounding the club. Melissa was last seen in the late afternoon by a railroad worker and a pizza delivery man. Melissa's mother and her boyfriend frantically looked for Melissa throughout the neighborhoods around the social club but could not find her. They called police to report Melissa missing at 9 p.m. Melissa would not be found until the following day, September 12, 1988. Her body was found in the Old Boston and Main Railway Yard near Andover Street and South Broadway, not far from the social club. She had been stabbed to death. After she was killed, her body had been run over by a train, amputating her left leg. Police interviewed numerous witnesses and identified multiple persons of interest over the years, but did not find enough evidence to arrest a suspect. Serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells, who rode rail lines and worked at carnivals, was considered as a potential suspect, but ultimately cleared of involvement in Melissa's murder. Melissa's mother passed away without ever learning who killed her daughter. Melissa's friend, Andrea Ganley, was just 7 years old at the time of Melissa's murder. Losing her friend in such a brutal way at such a young age played a major part in shaping the person she would grow up to be. As an adult, Andrea pressed for police to remain focused on the case and used social media to raise awareness about Melissa and her murder. According to authorities, the social media campaign was helpful as it resulted in new tips being called in. Melissa's case was formally reopened in 2014 and investigated by assistant district attorneys and state police detectives assigned to the Essex District Attorney's Office Cold Case Unit. It would take several more years of work before an arrest was finally made in Melissa's case. On April 27, 2022, nearly 34 years after Melissa was killed, Essex District Attorney Jonathan Blodgett announced that the night before, 74-year-old Marvin C. McClendon Jr. of Bremen, Alabama had been arrested as a fugitive from justice. He was considered a fugitive because of an arrest warrant that had been issued for him that day for Melissa's murder. McClendon was a retired corrections officer previously employed by the Massachusetts Department of Corrections, working for the department on 3 different occasions between 1970 and 2002. At the time of Melissa's murder, he was living in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, but he had several ties to the city of Lawrence. At the time, he was moonlighting as a carpenter and worked at several locations in Lawrence. He furthermore was known to frequent several establishments there, including the Seventh-day Adventist Church on Salem Street. He also drove a van that matched the description of one witnesses had seen Melissa near on the day she was killed. At the time of the press conference, McClendon was in the custody of the Cullman County Sheriff's Office pending his arraignment. A judge in Massachusetts had already ruled that he would be held without bond. McClendon ultimately waived rendition and was sent back to Massachusetts instead of first appearing in an Alabama court. McClendon first briefly appeared in court in Massachusetts on May 13th. He will next be in court on June 17th for a dangerousness hearing when it will be determined if he should continue to be held in custody. According to DA Blodgett, McClendon had been a person of interest in the case for some time. He further stated that evidence found on Melissa's body was instrumental in identifying McClendon as her killer. However, due to the ongoing criminal case, he could not elaborate on the nature of that evidence at the time of McClendon's arrest. On the day of McClendon's first court appearance, family. They took DNA samples from several members of the family, including Marvin. The rest of his family lives in Alabama, and he is the only known member of the family to have ever been in Massachusetts. He is also the only known member of his family who is left-handed, and analysis of Melissa's fatal wound showed that it had been inflicted by someone who was left-handed. Essex Victim Advocates has been in contact with the surviving members of Melissa's extended family. The family issued a statement on April 29th, which read, in part, "We would like to thank the police who have worked so hard over the years to make sure justice was found. Since her murder in 1988, we have always prayed for justice. We are very eager for the next steps that the Essex County DA's office will be taking in the prosecution of Marvin McClendon." In 1980, 22-year-old Dale Nancy Wyman lived on Washington Avenue in what was then the city of Vanier, Ontario. She had mentioned to some family members that she wanted to leave home because her father was abusive, but they did not expect her to leave without telling anyone where she was going. which she did on July 16, 1980. Around 11:45 that morning, she left home with a suitcase and hailed a cab to take her to a bus station on Catherine Street. She did not tell anyone where she was going, and her family never heard anything else from her. Police investigating her disappearance interviewed the main witness in the case, the taxi driver who picked up Dale and took her to the bus station. He told them that Dale had mentioned that she was not sure where she was traveling to, but she was considering Toronto or Montreal. He also said that when he went inside the bus terminal after dropping Dale off to get a cup of coffee, he had seen Dale talking with two other young adults who have never been identified. Tips called into police placed Dale in Alberta in 1991 and Toronto in 1992, but the sightings were never substantiated. Dale's family received a phone call from a hospital in Saskatoon trying to locate the family of an individual in their care, but this did not lead them to Dale. This call did lead to retired RCMP officer Linda Davidson, who is now the director of an organization called Murdered Unidentified Cold Case Investigations, investigating hospital records and unidentified remains from this area, when she began working on the case as a private investigator decades later. In May of 2021, in honor of Dale's 63rd birthday, there was a new appeal to the public for information about the case. Police in Ottawa released a new age-progressed sketch of what Dale might look like, along with a video message recorded by Dale's sister, Brenda Larchie. In it, Brenda stated, "Dale is deeply missed by her brother and two sisters. Our hearts hold an empty space for her, and we pray and hope that someone may remember her in any way. Please help us to resolve this and find some peace and closure. Thank you, and God bless for any tips brought forward." Brenda also spoke directly to her sister in case she saw the message, saying that she loved her and wishing her a happy birthday. It would be this effort that would ultimately lead to the resolution of Dale's case. On August 10, 2022, Ottawa police announced that a third party had eventually seen the age-progressed image of Dale and called to report that Dale had been living outside of Canada and had recently passed away. Ottawa Police's Missing Persons Unit followed up on the tip and was able to confirm the information. At the time, authorities did not release any further information about what had become of Dale. However, it was later disclosed that the third party who had called in was Dale's daughter. Dale had made a life for herself in Ohio, where she had a family. She passed away just 2 months before her daughter saw the age-progressed image and learned that she was a missing person whose family had never given up the search for her. Dale's siblings are struggling to accept this new information, as well as the fact that Dale passed away just before they found her. Dale's daughter has been put in contact with her family in Canada. 8-year-old Chad Choice lay in bed, lost in dreams, when an intruder quietly entered the house and took him into the darkness of the night. Initially considered a runaway case due to the lack of evidence, the investigation quickly turned into a nightmare as the critical 48-hour window passed with no sign of Chad. Who could have had the ability to silently enter Chad's home and take him without a trace? However, the most pressing question remained: would Chad ever reunite with his family and return home? The city of Tyler, named after the 10th President of the United States, John Tyler, is the largest city in northeastern Texas. Often referred to as the Rose Capital or Rose City, Tyler earned its reputation due to its extensive history of rose production, cultivation, and processing. Each October, the city welcomes thousands of tourists. However, the October of 1991 took a dark turn, as Chad Choice mysteriously vanished without a trace, casting a shadow over the usually vibrant atmosphere. Ernest Chadwick Choice, known affectionately as Chad Choice, came into the world on April 26, 1983 in Texas. He was one of the cherished 4 children in the Choice household, a beautiful soul deeply adored by his family, particularly his mother, Karen Elaine Choice. Chad was an outgoing youngster, surrounded by a large circle of friends with whom he frequently played. Moreover, his strong bond and affectionate relationship with his siblings were apparent, as they often enjoyed quality time together. Chad's energetic and lively nature was further evident in his regular visits to the playground. Chad had an older sister named Angela Choice, who fondly recalls that her little brother had a passion for riding bikes, scaling trees, and indulging in sports. Details about the remaining siblings were not made public. As a student at Mommy G. Griffin Elementary School, Chad's life was in its budding stage. At just 8 years old, he had his entire future ahead of him. However, fate often takes unforeseen turns, and tragically, Chad's destiny had already been sealed. The daily routine of the Choice family was shattered on the morning of October 31st, 1991. On the fateful morning, Chad's mother, Karen, rose early and went to the church without waking her children, allowing them to continue sleeping. However, just a few minutes into her church service, Karen received a phone call. Karen rushed back home and began scouring the neighborhood for Chad. She sought assistance from her neighbors as well. Despite their collective efforts and their thorough search, Chad seemed to have vanished without a trace. It was as though he had disappeared into thin air. Now it was the police's turn to investigate the matter. Karen dialed 711, reaching the Tyler police station, where Sergeant Bill Gokane responded and arrived at their house shortly after the call. During his initial inspection, he looked for signs of a break-in, but there were no indication of forced entry. Moreover, there were no signs of struggle inside the house. Based on the initial investigation, Gokane began to consider the possibility that Chad might have run away from home. However, Karen firmly believed that her son had been kidnapped. And as the sun set and the day turned into a chilly night, her tension escalated into fear. Adding to her fear, the crucial 48-hour window had passed without any signs of him. Later during the interview, Chad's older sister Angela Choice provided a crucial piece of information to the detective. Her house keys had disappeared the day before, and she distinctly recalled leaving them by the back door of the residence. This revelation raised additional questions, suggesting the possibility of a planned kidnapping or something even more disturbing. 2 days after Chad's disappearance, a ransom note was discovered at the business of Chad's uncle, Greg Sterling, prompting the investigation to swiftly shift focus to a kidnapping scenario. As the family attempted to deliver the money at the Greyhound bus station, as instructed, the kidnapper failed to appear. Several days later, Chad's mother received an anonymous phone call, revealing that Chad's disappearance was leaked to a family member's drug debt, with a man named Paco. Investigators discovered that Greg Sterling owed money to 3 Colombian drug dealers in the area, Paco Jr. and Carlos, shedding light on a possible motive of Chad's abduction. However, the case still remained elusive. On the 1-year anniversary of Chad's disappearance, his mother Karen Choice discovered a note fluttering on her car windshield. The note asserted that Chad was still alive and demanded $6,000 for his safe return. This development reignited the investigation, filling the Choice family with hope and prayers of seeing Chad again. However, the case suffered a setback when the kidnapper failed to make contact once more, causing the investigation to stall again. Time was not on their side. Slowly years were passing by, and Chad Choice's disappearance gradually evolved into a cold case. 4 years later, in October 1995, a grocery sack appeared on the Chase family's doorstep. Initially, it seemed like a regular grocery sack. However, upon opening, it revealed something that would haunt Karen Choice for the rest of her life. Inside the package was a human skull. The skull was subsequently sent to the FBI for analysis. DNA samples from Choice's family were collected to compare with the skull's DNA, to confirm its identity as Chad's. Despite these efforts, the results remained inconclusive. Later, the skull was sent to a university in Texas for further examination, involving the expertise of forensic anthropology. The results came back, and unfortunately Karen's worst fears were confirmed, when forensic analysis revealed that the skull indeed belonged to Chad. Investigators grappled with the ruthless nature of a person who not only commits a crime, but continues to torment the victim's family for years. Despite the struggle to comprehend this, Karen, all along, had an unshakable feeling in her heart that she would never see Chad alive again. All she could do now was pray for justice. While Chad Choice's case grew increasingly difficult to solve, another narrative unfolded in Smith County Jail in early 1996. A man named Patrick Horn was slated to be sentenced in federal court for credit union robberies and carjacking charges. He was also charged with the murder of J.C. Levasseur, a fruit stand owner. It became evident that he was destined to spend the rest of his life behind bars or even face a potential death sentence. However, This man we are discussing was soon to become the center of Chad's murder case. It occurred when he mentioned the name Chad Choice to the police during his time behind the bars. While this might have been a part of a deal to reduce his prison sentence, to the investigators it marked the first significant breakthrough they had made in the case so far. Horn was a resident in the Choice family's neighborhood and was friends with them. During his interview regarding Chad's case, Horn informed investigators that he knew the identity of Chad's killer. As per Horn's account, Chad was murdered by 2 local drug dealers, both Colombian nationals, who were known by the street names Paco and Carlos. But the case was just about to get more twisted. After Horn made the statement, he received a package in his jail cell containing a small boy's leg bone, later confirmed through analysis to be Chad's. Horn asserted to the police that Paco and Carlos had sent the package. However, detectives couldn't shake the feeling that Horn was hiding something significant about the entire story. Despite repeated questioning by the detectives, Horn consistently maintained that he had no additional information apart from Paco and Carlos being the culprits. However, on May 31, 1996, Horn finally disclosed something more. Horn then revealed the precise location where Chad was buried. Shortly afterward, he was escorted by the police to 401 Sunnyside in Tyler, which was Horn's own backyard. At 4 p.m. that same day, the detectives began digging and discovered Chad's skeletal remains, along with 38 caliber shell casings. This moment marked a sudden turn in the investigation. With the evidence before them, all suspicions now pointed directly at Patrick Horn. Without delay, in June 1996, the investigators hurried to Athens, a city in Texas. In a jail cell there, a man sat who was anticipated to be a crucial piece of the puzzle, important in solving the case once and for all. This man was none other than Patrick Horn's brother, Keaton Horn, who was facing charges of probation violation. The detectives' suspicions were completely on point this time. With Keaton's statement, this case solidified into concrete evidence that Horn was indeed responsible for this notorious crime. Horn's scheme to mislead investigators had ultimately unraveled. The solution to a seemingly unsolvable case was finally in hand. However, one question still lingered. Why did Horn kill Chad? On September 24, 1999, 8 years after Chad Choice's murder, the jury found Horn guilty in the Smith County Courthouse and sentenced him to death. However, even at the end of his chapter, Horn witnessed tormenting the Choice household. Horn adamantly refused to sign the waiver allowing Chad's remains to be released to his family for a proper burial. Legally, he was required to agree to the release since the remains were evidence in his case. However, he insisted on retaining control over the fate of the 8-year-old Chad's remains. Horn did initially sign a waiver, indicating his agreement to the release of Chad Choice's remains. However, the document was somehow lost between his attorney's office and the judge's office. At first deemed a mere formality, District Judge Diane Dawn announced in a December 1999 hearing that she would order the release of 30 exhibits, including Chad's skull and other bones to his family for burial, contingent upon Horn signing another waiver. Horn's appellate lawyer, Tony Wilkinson of Greenville, sent the document to Horn via Federal Express, anticipating its return with his signature within a day. However, a month passed without any response from Horn. He did not reply to several letters from his attorney and ignored messages sent to him through officials at the Atlanta Federal Prison. Assistant District Attorney Ed Marty stated that if the remains were granted without the waiver, they might have to be exhumed sometime in the future. It remains uncertain when Horn eventually signed the waiver, and if he did, when he signed it. Furthermore, Horn was 17 years old when he committed the murder of Chad. According to a ruling by the United States Supreme Court, anyone under the age of 18 cannot be executed. As a result, his sentence was commuted to life in prison. While this might not have been the exact form of justice Karen Joyce desired, she can finally find solace in knowing that Patrick Horn will never walk free. As the final chapter in the Chad Joyce case concludes, there remains a haunting mystery that continues to trouble both investigators and Chad's grieving family. Why did Patrick Horn go to such lengths? Kidnapping Chad Joyce, refusing the ransom, and ultimately taking his life? What could have motivated such a horrifying act? And do you believe the mother who lost her beloved child will ever find peace again? Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.